the consciousness and the cosmos, in assistance of the more profound understanding of the current planetary transition.
The stimuli that accompanies the pilgrim in his return to his cosmic home.
The consciousness and the cosmos, radio program of Uksim, Planetary Service Center.
Hello dear listeners, my name is Jez.
And my name is Sarawina.
We will be hosting the program.
Today's topic is internal stimuli and intuition. What is the appropriate treatment we need to give to internal stimuli that we have received? And how does a being develop from that moment? What occurs during the process?
Si estamos hablando de evolución, el ser recibe estímulos evolutivos continuamente. Pero si estamos hablando de tener conciencia de esa recepción, la capacidad de percibir que el estímulo llega, si después hablamos de la capacidad de profundizarlo.
If we are talking about evolution, the being receives evolutionary stimuli continuously. But if we are talking about being aware of that receiving, the ability to perceive that the stimulus is coming, then we are talking about the ability to deepen it, and finally the ability to apply it, to obey it. So depending on our stage, we receive a continuous influx of cosmic life through the inner channel, from the mineral kingdom, through the vegetable and animal kingdoms to the human kingdom. Daniel would like to stress that the difference is whether we are aware of it or not. So are we referring to the stage where we are aware of it? It's also the treatment, because the laws ensure that situations, even if you are not aware of them, force you to participate in one way or another. In other words, from the evolutionary basis, you are always going to participate, because if there were no participation, you would be in a state of deception.
Entonces, nosotros siempre tenemos la posibilidad de acceder a una participación del tipo que fuera, en función de los estímulos, de los flujos de vida interna que van llegando. Solo que a partir de una cierta etapa,
we always have the opportunity to engage in activities based on the stimuli and internal experiences we encounter. However, there comes a point where we start to face challenges as we become aware that something is happening within us. This awareness, or the ability to recognize internal stimuli, develops over time until we clearly understand what we perceive. So, if we talk about this stage, then certainly we talk about obedience. We focus on the obedience to the internal stimuli and the ability to let go of the impulses that our ego and personality continually try to impose on us.
Entonces, digamos que las leyes cósmicas tienen de un modo muy diferente en cuenta a aquellos que están en una etapa como aquellos que están en otra etapa. Cuanto mayor es el registro del estímulo, quiere decir la percepción del estímulo, entonces rendir cuentas ante la energía cósmica, ante las leyes evolutivas, va a tener otra connotación.
The cosmic laws consider individuals on different stages uniquely. The greater the stimulus of the register, that is, the perception of the stimulus, the greater the accountability to the cosmic energy and to the evolutionary laws, which will have a different connotation. And at this time, for the planetary process of transition, the most important are those who form a minority, where there is already a capacity, albeit limited and always transitory, but limited, to register, to arrest awareness, that we have something to do in terms of that issue, that we are beginning to perceive. So it is that minority that is going to make a difference on behalf of the world of humanity. We always talk about 10% approximately, if we are 8,000 today. Millions of people today, we are talking about 800 million. So within those 800 million, we are going to find that possibly 10 or 15% may be aware of those records. We would say that there are between 80 and 100 billion people on the planet. That is to say, nothing. Nothing. And yet they have fundamental importance because precisely the evolutionary laws confirm continuously for a long time on this planet and in the transition that it is from small minorities that the new is implanted, that the revolution of that which is unpublished can take place. So let's reduce it to 100 million to make it round. And well, 100 billion put to the test to see what they register, have the capacity to renounce what their ego and personality seek to impose. We have the capacity to accept these internal stimuli and have the humility to deepen them.
And Daniel Gagliardo continues, why do we say humility? Because most of us, perhaps, do not have the capacity to say, I don't have the answer. It may be that the answer comes from somewhere else. In fact, the answers are cosmic, they're internal.
The 100 million individuals must come to understand that what is being offered to them is not a gift or a prize. It is a medal of merit. This offering is essential for all of humanity and the planet, but it can only be made available to a minority for a limited time. They need to be able to perceive this reality and accept that perception, even if it is initially crude. Time and again, this awareness may be rough around the edges. However, they must cultivate a deeper understanding and have the courage to obey and persist in that obedience.
So probably we could say then that donation is the key to achieve sustainability.
Pero es engañoso, es capcioso ese no que estoy pronunciando, porque hay etapas, como decíamos en el otro tema, hay etapas donde un ser no tiene la capacidad de donarse, pero en base a su estado evolutivo, él va a recibir de la ley del sustento lo que corresponda, porque si no, ¿cómo llegamos a una etapa donde conscientemente percibimos que hace falta, que realmente la cuestión es donarse?
It is more or less the same stimulus, inner impulse or inner revelation. They are talking about the same thing. The flow of energy that comes from the inner and the higher core of consciousness and is poured into the ego and the personality. In this regard, if an individual is part of the evolutionary plan and belongs to that 10% of humanity, they have a commitment to apply the insights they receive internally towards their own transformation. This transformation is essential for cooperation, service, and improving the planetary situation. First and foremost, individuals must approach this with courage and humility, recognizing the need to transform themselves. This means that the inner nourishment they receive, essentially the inner sustenance, they must actively use that for their own transformation. There are, and until the transition is over, there will be people who may have a degree of awareness of what is poured into them internally, but they do not have the courage to transform themselves. So they put it in a box. They put it in the niche of theory. Practical spirituality, as one might put it in worldly verbiage, begins at home. One cannot be a spiritual practitioner for the sake of the evolutionary plan if one does not transform oneself. That is, if the food he receives internally does not operate as nourishment for his transformation.
What percentage receiving stimulus for the evolutionary plan? And is there a difference between stimuli and impulse?
No, es más o menos lo mismo. Estímulo, impulso interno, ¿sí? Revelación interna. Están hablando de una misma cuestión. Quiere decir, del flujo de energía que proveniente del núcleo interno y superior de conciencia es vertido sobre el ego y la personalidad. Y respecto a esto de si es para la asistencia del plan evolutivo.
As we said in the other topic, there are stages where a being does not have the capacity to donate, but based on his evolutionary stage will receive from the law of substance what is appropriate. How else do we get to a stage where we consciously perceive that it is needed, that is really a matter of donating? To reach this stage where a being understands that the issue is to donate to the cosmic life, to one's own inner life, they will have to go through cycles of stages and stages of cycles where donation did not exist as a concept. And if it existed as a concept, he would not associate it with his own cosmic axis of life. He could not perceive that it was in relation to his cosmic axis of life that his donation was made. Depending on each stage, how the being can respond or not respond what is offered to him, to what the law of substance offers him.
Han existido, existen, y hasta que termine la transición van a existir personas que pueden tener un grado de conciencia de lo que internamente se vierte sobre ellas, pero no tienen el coraje de transformarse. Entonces lo encajonan, lo ponen en el nicho de la teoría. La espiritualidad práctica, como quien podría decirlo en palabrería mundana, empieza por casa.
There have always been, and there will continue to be, people who possess some awareness of the insights they receive internally. However, many lack the courage to transform themselves and instead confine these insights to a theoretical box. Practical spirituality, or spirituality in practice, as it could be described in everyday language, truly begins at home. One cannot pursue spiritual practice to fulfill the evolutionary plan without undergoing personal transformation. In other words, if the knowledge one receives internally does not serve as a nourishment for their own growth and transformation, it remains ineffective.
The beings that receive inner revelations, inner stimuli, inner nourishment, receive it in order to transform themselves into a material being that is constitutive of the planet. And this is where the phrase that the teacher Jesus said is fulfilled, to be in the world without belonging to it. Because if the being cannot transform himself, and with what he receives from the inner levels, he is in the world belonging to it.
Hay una fantasía muy grande en muchos seres, no solo en algunos, en muchos seres, casi en la totalidad con excepciones, en creer que están acá para una gran misión. Entonces, dentro de ese 10%, de esos 800 millones de personas, volviendo al 10% de esos 800 o 80 o 100 millones de personas, hay una cantidad de personas que viven una fantasía respecto a lo que tienen que hacer a favor.
Exactly. There is a very big fantasy in many beings, not only in some, in many beings, almost in the totality with some exceptions, to believe that they are here for a great mission. So, within that 10% of those 800 million people, going back to 10% of those 800 to 80 or 100 million people, there is a great number of people that live a fantasy regarding what they have to do in favour of the evolutionary plan.
Could we say then that when a being is being shown internally what he needs to change, where that he has to make some transformation and he have to begin that path of transformation, this is probably where these revelations that the being begins to receive can be taken a little bit difficult from that being, because the path they have to go through is quite challenging.
Exactly. There is a very big fantasy in many beings, not only in some, in many beings, almost in the totality with some exceptions, to believe that they are here for a great mission. So, within that 10% of those 800 million people, going back to 10% of those 800 to 80 or 100 million people, there is a great number of people that live a fantasy regarding what they have to do in favour of the evolutionary plan.
And when the internal stimuli is not consistent and it is not empathetic to that fantasy, they are thrown off balance. Therefore, the being has to learn to accept and obey what it receives internally without question.
Hay una fantasía muy grande en muchos seres, no solo en algunos, en muchos seres, casi en la totalidad con excepciones, en creer que están acá para una gran misión. Entonces, dentro de ese 10%, de esos 800 millones de personas,
what a being fantasizes about, what he has to do for the planet, is usually very distant from the other. So we have to have that capacity. We are here to fully embrace what the energy offers us and what life presents through our inner channel. It's important not to second guess ourselves by thinking, I expected something different. Instead, let go of those expectations, as they often do not align with what our inner selves are trying to provide.
What is the difference between intuition and perception? What do masters say about those who rely on intuition?
Percepción es todo aquello que los sentidos registran, pero todo lo que los registran los sentidos, todo lo registrado por los sentidos, generalmente no es intuición. Entonces, percepción es registro, pero registro puede ser de cualquier cosa. Ahora, intuición no puede ser de varias cosas. Intuición es un proceso, o la intuición es un proceso, ¿sí?, que se activa, se ejecuta a través del canal interno, del canal que la vida interna...
Perception encompasses everything that the senses register, but not everything registered by the senses is considered intuition. Therefore, while perception is a form of registration, this registration could pertain to anything. Intuition, however, is specific and cannot be many things. Intuition is a process that is activated and executed through the inner channel, the channel that the inner life takes to the inner consciousness of the being, to matter, to the psychophysical field, when the being is mature both internally and externally. Perception is everything, some say. I perceived, and I believe that they truly did. However, when they claim I perceived the hierarchies, it is a different matter. I recognize the dissuasive forces, we all do, though some are more compulsively engaged while others are careful to avoid committing themselves. So some perceptions are indisputable, and others can be brought into the realm of doubt.
And those who have that connection?
¿Quiénes son esos que tienen esa conexión? Porque pueden ser seres conectados internamente, pero también eso puede ser conectado con la capa astral. O sea, recibí tal cosa y puede ser una percepción cierta de la capa astral, de la capa psíquica. Los seres que ya funcionan intuitivamente mientras están bajo ley de karma, obviamente, que es donde se empieza a ensayar, y la intuición no solo es la gran herramienta de instrucción, sino es una de las herramientas que nos pone a prueba. ¿Por qué decimos esto? Porque lo que llega por la vía intuitiva es lo más difícil de ejecutar, no es lo más fácil.
Who are those individuals who possess a connection that allows them to be interconnected beings and connect with the astral realm? I have received insights regarding this. It can involve a specific perception of the astral and psychic layers. These beings operate intuitively, while still adhering to the law of karma. This is where we begin to test our intuition. Not only is it a vital tool for guidance, but it also serves as one of the means through which we are tested. Why do we say this? Because what comes through the intuitive pathway is the most difficult to execute. It is not the easiest. Beings who say that they receive something intuitively may or may not obey that.
When we talk about inner impulse, are we talking about intuition, or are we talking about another kind of instrument? Often we hear Daniel saying that every intuitive stimuli is an internal stimuli, but not every internal stimuli is intuitive.
Percepción es todo aquello que los sentidos registran, pero todo lo que los registran los sentidos, todo lo registrado por los sentidos, generalmente no es intuición. Entonces, percepción es registro, pero registro puede ser de cualquier cosa. Ahora, intuición no puede ser de varias cosas. Intuición es un proceso, o la intuición es un proceso, ¿sí?, que se activa, se ejecuta a través del canal interno, del canal que la vida interna.
Since we are on an evolutionary basis, we can't do without being guided and fed by internal stimuli. However, only at some stages, from crossing the mean upwards in the human kingdom, do the internal stimuli have a gradual ascending intuitive character. At some point, the inner channel becomes more and more an increasingly consistent way, the intuitive channel. But until the soul and the monad are at a certain level, and the ego and the personality at a certain level in relation to that, there can be no intuition, but there can be inner stimuli.
Entonces, el canal interno en algún momento se va convirtiendo cada vez más, ¿sí?, de un modo cada vez más consistente en el canal intuitivo. Pero hasta que el alma y la mónada no están en cierto nivel y el ego y la personalidad en el que le corresponda en relación a eso, no puede haber intuición, pero sí estímulos internos. Entonces, una persona puede ser muy primitiva, muy dual, muy fluctuante.
So a person can be very primitive, very dualistic, very fluctuating, and is registering an inner stimulus, even without knowing that it is an inner stimulus, which does not mean that the being is intuitive.